More than 1,000 parliamentarians from across Europe have signed a letter strongly opposing plans by Israel to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. The plan was unveiled under US President Donald Trump's vision for peace in January and may be voted on in Israeli parliament as early as the 1st of July. The project has been led by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is seeking to extend Israeli sovereignty over parts of the West Bank containing Jewish settlements. Our next guest, Liam Getreu, is the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund Australia, and he is with us to talk about these potential developments. Liam, good to talk to you. What is planned in this annexation?
Well, that's one of the things that we're still waiting to hear some details on. There are a number of different options that Prime Minister Netanyahu is apparently considering. The important thing to realise is that this has been a dream of Israel's far right wing of the settler movement for many, many years now. They want to do everything they can to stop a two-state solution from occurring, and that, of course, would create a safe and secure Israel next to an independent and free Palestinian state as well. Annexation undermines that at almost every level. And so what we're looking at now is perhaps one of the last opportunities to bring us back to the founding goals of this two-state outcome.
With this plan, which was put forward by Trump through his son-in-law Jared Kushner, what voice did the Palestinians have?
Well, almost none. They were pretty much excluded from the start. And it's because what we see this plan is really a negotiation between Israelis and Americans and not Israelis and Palestinians. And annexation would double down on that. It would create effectively a permanent occupation of Palestinians, millions of Palestinians living in the West Bank without the ability to vote for the government that controls their lives, without basic human rights, basic civil rights. Annexation on almost any level, any kind of minimal plan or maximal plan, will create this permanent occupation, which is bad not just for Palestinians, obviously, but also for Israeli security, and it goes to the heart of Israel's democracy as well.
Let's talk about the security aspect, which I find fascinating, because even Israel's security establishment has warned against this, saying that it really jeopardises the cornerstone of the whole strategy because they work so closely, particularly with many of the Palestinian side, to try and maintain security. How is that going to be affected?
Absolutely. The Israel Defence Force have been clear, according to reports with the Prime Minister and the political establishment, that they don't support annexation. Overwhelmingly, there have been a number of letters circulating, and overwhelmingly retired members of the security and military establishment are really begging the Israeli government not to go through with it. The peace treaty that Israel has with Jordan and even Egypt as well would probably be at risk when those countries say that this is a step too far. There is definitely a security angle to this that is worrying, but also importantly, again, is that you'll have millions, potentially millions of Palestinians living in a situation that is meant to be temporary. The occupation that began in 1967 was supposed to end soon after. It's now more than 50 years later, and yet annexation would make that effectively permanent.
If this goes ahead, would there be any international repercussions? Would there be any ability for there to be any international sanction on Israel?
Well, I think sanctions is a bit down the road. First, I think what there is clear that we can see is a global consensus against annexation from governments with left and right-wing governments. You see in the United Kingdom, for example, Boris Johnson's government has come out very strongly against annexation. You began with a letter from 1,000 European members of Parliament, again from left and right, against this plan. Really, the only country that is in favour of this is the United States, and Australia has been curiously silent as well. We don't know from here what our government supports. We've tried to find out an answer and we haven't been able to. We've seen leadership from both Penny Wong and Adam Bandt in this, but we're not really sure what our government is doing, and from that perspective, silence and not coming out and joining the global consensus to condemn Israel's plans for annexation is a silent tick that I think is worrying.
Yeah, so do you read that as approval? Why do you think there has been that silence from the Morrison government?
I'm really not sure. I think that that's a question that we need to find out from them. Again, when you look at their ideological sisters in the United Kingdom, for example, Boris Johnson's government has come out very strongly against it. Why is Australia remaining silent? This is not supporting annexation is not a pro-Israel perspective. It is a pro-settler perspective. Supporting Israel means supporting a two-state solution. It means supporting an eventual Palestinian state. It means supporting Israeli democracy. The annexation that the Prime Minister is now planning undermines all of those things. A policy in support of Israel would oppose annexation.
But why would it impact Israel's democracy? I mean, this is a newly formed government. It is certainly an unusual coalition. How would that undermine democracy, though?
There have been any number of threats against Israel's democracy from within over the last 10 years in particular. One way that we see it is if Israel ends up applying its sovereignty to large swathes of the West Bank, you'll end up with a Palestinian village next to the Jordan River, for example, in an area that Israel will say and will treat the same that it treats Tel Aviv or Haifa. And yet those residents of the Palestinian village there won't have any rights. It won't be able to vote. They won't be citizens, or at least they may be just second-class citizens. And yet the Israeli settlement just next door, the residents there, the Jewish residents there, will have full citizenship. You can't be a democracy and give citizenship and rights to some and not to others. And that goes to many of the other threats that we see to Israeli democracy, including the Prime Minister's attacks on journalists, on the courts, a long campaign against human rights organisations. This is a major threat to Israeli democracy.
Good to talk, Liam. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Beverly.